Hey everyone, Brian Lipp here. Thanks so much for joining today. Excited to collaborate on how important it is to support the customer and buyer journeys with content. Want you to think about something before we get started, and then I'll introduce our guest. Think about the last time you made a major purchase decision in your personal life. Where did you start? Did you jump on Google, maybe ask your Facebook network, or check out those Amazon reviews? I definitely do. And it's something that I think we all have to be very aware of in the reality of how business to business is changing. Today, I'm really excited to have a guest, Kyle Parrish. Hey, Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. I'm Kyle Parrish. I'm the VP of Sales at Showpad. Showpad is a sales enablement company, and I'm excited to be talking with Brian today.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Great to have you here as well. Brian Lett, VP Sales at Sales for Life. We're really helping companies, sales, and marketing teams move from analog to digital. Today, what we're going to do is really talk a little bit about the state of the market to open. Then really we have to think about how can we enable our teams and our sales professionals to share the right content at the right time. And at the same time, this helps to differentiate ourselves from really how customer experience can be elevated by doing this effectively, and how digital is really the glue to bring sales and marketing together, knocking down those age-old silos. When we look at the landscape of the market right now, it's definitely moving fast. And Kyle, I thought I'd throw it over to you here. What's some of your perception around what's changing? What does this data mean to you?
Yeah, I think this is super interesting stuff, and we see it every day at Showpad. Um, the content is really becoming much more important in the buying journey. As Brian opened up with, nobody engages a salesperson the first thing they do. In fact, most of our customers are 60% of the way through the buying journey by the time they talk to anybody in sales at all. They're looking at pieces of content on their own, sometimes multiple pieces of content. And so it's really important to add value to that conversation or the interaction the first time that you have it. And that's shown here as 74% of buyers choose the sales rep that was the first to bring value and insight. A, because that's becoming more and more rare that sales reps do that in the first engagement, but B, because that's what buyers want. They've done their research, they've done their education. Now they want to engage with a salesperson to bring value.
Right. I think it's a great point. When you look at that opportunity, 3/4 of deals are awarded to people that do that effectively. The writing's on the wall there. And I actually get approached quite often. People cold call me, people try to sell me stuff, which is completely fine. And what people don't always realize is that you see those messages, but you don't necessarily act on them. And it's just the reality how the vast majority of sales professionals that are reaching out to me and some of my peers that I talk to a lot are really just canned, templated messages. There's no real insight or effort into actually educating you, per your point, Kyle. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's also a risk. If we don't really start to shift how we serve people, you're going to have a tough time winning and also maintaining customer relationships.
That's right. Yeah, I get prospected into all the time, and I don't mind it at all, especially when it's good. But oftentimes it's really bad, and that can hurt a company's brand so badly. It's just a huge risk, like you identified.
Yeah, it's true. Like, I'm passionate about sales. I like seeing people do a great job, but unfortunately, not enough people are. And I thought this point's pretty interesting. It reminds me of a situation recently where someone I was working with had identified an incredible potential customer. So they met all their ideal customer profile criteria. They really thought it was an incredible opportunity. They were nurturing, but they weren't really getting anywhere. So they started to become a bit disappointed. But then they maintained their persistence, and then they had a fruitful conversation. And it was really interesting because as they had been nurturing with content that was along the lines of what that person was interested in, because they had done their homework on industry trends, the persona that they were serving, and we'll touch on that in a few slides. When they had that initial conversation, they were surprised to hear that someone had seen value in the content they were using, and they had acted on it. They had actually taken that piece of content into a boardroom and discussed it. So I thought that was really cool because that wasn't asked, that was really just acted on because value was perceived. Have you seen anything like that yourself, Kyle? Any of those experiences where it's not as linear as we would like to think? It's much more circular in nature.
Yeah, you nailed it. Unless you're selling a commoditized product that everybody knows about, the buying journey is not a linear path. And we see this all the time. Our customers come to us and they say, we want to make the buying experience that much better. That's why we look at sales enablement solutions. And you can prep as much as you want for a customer meeting. You can do your homework. You can know what the customer is going to ask or think you know, but that conversation may go into a different direction than you prepared for. And so being able to respond with a piece of content, say, that identifies or goes to answer the question or where the conversation is shifted is super important in the moment. Having to say, I think I have a piece of content on that, I'll send it to you sometime later. That stops you right there. The momentum is lost. You want to continue the momentum in your sales process. And so being agile and being able to do that in the moment is very important.
That's a great point. And that's not easy. You got to know your stuff if you're going to be able to actually listen and then reflect what you're going to show to support that conversation. I think that's a tremendous opportunity for people to really make sure that they have themselves organized in order to be agile that way. And then beyond being organized, to your point, you have to have the domain knowledge or the expertise in what you're talking about. Let's continue to... Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, sales is fundamentally just getting more difficult. It's impossible for a sales rep to have all of that knowledge in their head. They need to be supported by content in the sales cycle.
Right. I actually think that's refreshing too, how you have a lot more access to information as a buyer or as a customer. So I think the customer has every right to demand an elevated experience from sales professionals when they are engaged with them much later in the process. So I completely agree. So what do you think about the realities of how you get ready? How do we start to shift our mindset in order to serve better?
Yeah, I mean, continuous learning is the perfect way to open this conversation up. We sell to a lot of medical device customers and a lot of cybersecurity customers, and I can't think of two industries that are more innovative and changing every single day. And so you need to keep on top of your stuff in order to be relevant in those conversations. You need to understand that buyer persona and the buyer journey to know how these guys and women are gonna respond to you in the sales cycle. So continuous learning is something that we push very hard here because things change. Even from day to day, they change. So you've got to continuously stay on top of that. And that goes to the culture of the sales team. If you have the kind of culture in your sales team where you can push your chair back and ask your neighbor a question, their success is not their intellectual property. Their success is shared across the entire company. That's the kind of culture that you want to build when you've got a bunch of people in the same room, because 5 heads is definitely better than 1 when you talk about this kind of stuff.
I think this is a great byproduct of how buyers and customers are demanding that we serve them better. So in order for us to do so, if we're not fostering continuous learning and then also sharing, to your point, good luck. You're not going to be able to keep up with your domain knowledge and your acumen. And that also reminds me about another example recently where we were working with a customer. They actually took a look internally at all of the enablement and internal training that they have done, which is also a healthy exercise. Not enough companies kind of audit that experience. But what stood out to them is that 96% of the internal training for the sales team was just product oriented and company updates oriented. Only 4% was really about elevating the customer conversation, the business acumen, the industry trends, all the stuff that we really need to dig deeper into in order to have a more productive business conversation. And we're also seeing a lot of people really try to think more transformative in their solutions. So rather than just representing, say, that single product or that single SKU, how can we represent an overall solution which requires a bigger business conversation? So I think it's actually shocking still that everyone's, for the most part, pushing product knowledge. Of course, you have to have that. I'm not discounting it. But you need to really study the market that you serve and then enable your people to have those conversations.
It's a really great point, actually, and that is a shocking statistic. Probably not unlike many companies out there that create content for their onboarding process and then just forget about it. Oh, we've already ramped that person up. They're already onboarded. We don't need to worry about it. If you go back and audit that content and to be able to update it with the new and the interesting and the changes that are happening every day.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, too. You can't just have that great boot camp and then expect that it's all going to stick. We actually see some science that says about 70% of learning is from the reinforcement. It's from after that initial experience that you have. And so that's a really important way to think about ongoing enablement to foster domain knowledge and acumen, you've got to be tracking your markets. And what's cool is that you can have that information pulled to you now. You don't have to go out and search for it every day. And I find that if you use a free tool like feedly.com as an example, take a bit of time to set up, say, the top bloggers, the top publications within your domain, so that information starts to come to you directly. So when you come in the morning, you can spend a few minutes digesting that content and then acting on sharing that content with people to help to move into the next point of our chat here. Just really, how can you differentiate yourself? One of the things that I'd like to bring forward here, Kyle, is just the concept of never sending a naked message. You can notice the people that put in effort into how they engage you to try to secure an appointment or say to carry the momentum in a cycle based on the content, but also the creativity. So for example, anytime that you reach out to someone, include a piece of content with a little bit of context into why it matters to them, why it's important. And we're also seeing some people have some fun with emerging mediums like video. It's really easy now to shoot a brief video and share that with a customer or with a buyer. And that just humanizes the experience. Emails are great for, say, sharing an attachment, but they're not great for communicating. You can really leverage video to be genuine, to share the point as far as the way you deliver it, the actual body language behind it, etc. So we think the concept of always educating the market or never sending a naked message is really important to elevate the customer experience and how they buy, and then also to separate you from the pack.
Yeah, that last point is dead on. We both get emails every single day, and there's no creativity to them. It's almost lazy, and you can spot them immediately. So to break through the noise, you've got to be able to be a little bit creative. And so I'm in full agreement with you here.
Cool. Yeah, creativity is good. Of course, there has to be value in the creativity. And then I would say you need a persistence to this slide. It's just not going to be a home run every time. Per that example I shared earlier, where you've got to be going after people with the right amount of effort and professionalism, but you can't just make one call and then walk away. We've got to be professionally persistent. And I don't think it's just the phone or that in-person or that social outreach. It's all of them. What does the customer engage with? How can we reciprocate in how they want to communicate back? So we've got to keep an open mind as far as the different mediums that we're using. But I would say that you really have to ensure that digital insight or the ability for you to be agile, Kyle, like you're mentioning, and how you conduct a conversation is absolutely critical. Do you have any experience with your team on how they are being professionally persistent or the type of effort they're putting in to get that first appointment or to continue a conversation?
Absolutely. This looks a lot like our approach as well. It's not just one medium, it's multiple mediums. And we know that one touch is not going to do it. Two touches isn't going to do it. Sometimes it takes as many as 14. I don't want to scare people out there, but that's what sometimes it takes. And to do 14 unique touches where there's value in every single one, because the worst thing that you can do is try to send the same message twice and hope it works the second time. It's not going to. So you need to vary it. You need to not be annoying. Everybody knows that people's guard goes up when they hear of salespeople. So you need to bring value to that conversation and make them want to talk to you. Meet them on their terms. If you know you're selling into a very old school type of industry, maybe a mailing piece is going to do it better than a bunch of emails will. So to be creative and to meet them on their terms, I think is super important.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Let's still be open-minded to any type of outreach. And even beyond outreach, I think it's a lot around preparation. So say we're going to get together at a conference next week, rather than walking into that meeting cold, if you will, you can have much more insightful questions and conversations based on the access to information that you have. So let's really make sure that we're preparing more effectively to have the conversation across whatever medium it is. It's in person, it's on the phone, or you're chatting online. When we think about the realities of the stages and how people invest, what do you think is changing here, or what do you think is really important for people listening today, Kyle, to kind of think about when you're looking to understand your customer's buying journey?
Yeah, this is something that we think about every single day at Showpad. The buying journey is the most important part, the buying experience, and to be able to set yourself apart, again, with some of the stuff I've already mentioned, bringing value into the very first conversation, ensuring that you continue to add value in every subsequent conversation, but to understand how they want to buy and to be able to bring that insight into the conversation, because we could be selling into, say, a med device customer, and med device customers are going to know way more about med device than we ever will. But we might actually know more about how med device companies buy than a single med device company would, because we do it all the time. So now we become the experts and we can share that knowledge, but we have to first understand that and be able to bring that value to them as consultants in the buying process.
I think that's a really good point. Even when people do want to invest, they don't know how to buy. It's more complex. There's more stakeholders. Of course, there's always competing priorities or political agendas you got to be aware of. So I think as you have delivered value, say you've helped someone go from an awareness state to then considering a solution, you've earned the right to have that conversation. So we've been looking about this solution and we see an opportunity. What's the reality of how you would go down this path internally? Who needs to be involved? What are some of the competing priorities that we're up against? We actually have to have conversations to make sure that we're helping people buy in the way that they want to. And I don't think that happens enough in the marketplace. I think it's too easy to get caught up into your sales process or your corporate mandates rather than flipping how you're thinking to really ensure that you're putting yourself in the customer or the buyer's shoes and then reverse engineering all the steps that has to happen in order to move towards that decision. What we've also noticed is, if you have a point, Kyle, go ahead, and then I had another comment I thought of as well.
Sorry, just very quickly. In today's day and age, of course, your customers are going to be engaging multiple solutions. They've got to have competition. They've got to show that they looked at other solutions. And in order for you to break through that and to come out looking better than the competition, maybe your product is the best and you're super lucky. Sometimes the best salesperson wins, though, because they continue to bring value into those conversations by understanding what are the pain points, what are the really interesting parts of the solution, and to be able to craft a specific solution sell to that.
Right. That's a good point, too. The comment I was going to make is we've looked at some data here, and I'll pass it over to you in a couple slides because I know you think a lot about data helping to inform decisions. It's been surprising to see that awareness-oriented content is really beneficial, more so than you would think. You may think that customers are already further down the path, and sometimes they are, don't get me wrong, but there's always an element of awareness needing to be created. So say you're working with a champion or a few champions in an organization to win some business. They may have other stakeholders in the company that need to be engaged that have no clue what you've already covered, or they haven't done the homework like some of those champions have. So there always has to be an awareness, consideration, decision-oriented content framework in how you're serving people, and then it's rinse and repeat. It continues. When we start to think about the realities of sales and marketing working better together, those age-old silos, what are your thoughts on how do you foster that? Do you see anything internally or with your customers on what some best practices look like? And then I thought I'd share a couple ideas based on what we've been seeing recently.
Yeah, there's the qualitative and the quantitative. And I think it's important to have both. Right? Because you could go to your sales team and ask them for their feedback, and they may tell you how the content is performing. You may only ask one or two salespeople when in fact you've got 1,000 out there in the field. And so you only get one perspective. So that is important stuff because you definitely want to continue to have your ear to the ground, so to speak, with respect to how your sales team is using content. But then you've also got to be able to measure it. And so often we talk to customers that have no content measurability. They're spending 20% of their marketing budget creating content, and they have no idea what the ROI is on that. And oftentimes 70 to 80, sometimes even as high as 90% of it goes completely unused for the purpose that it was built for. And so to be able to measure that and to know which pieces of content are resonating helps to align your sales and marketing teams much better, because now sales is getting what they want, marketing is focusing on what they really want to focus on. And this has been a relationship that has been kind of at loggerheads for a long time because they're measured differently. And so we find that bringing those two teams together along something that they can agree on and measure and see, that they both get tremendous value out of it.
Great examples. Yeah, I think it's the age-old problem, but at the same time, digital's fostering some great solutions. One of the things we've seen be pretty effective is to formalize this a little bit more. We may have done some homework in understanding a great piece of content, but to your point, what's the qualitative or the context behind the conversations you're having in the market? Let's get together on a monthly basis and have a discussion about it. Let's take a look at the quantitative information to your point, and then wrap in some conversation around how it was used, why it was used, what was the sentiment from the market, what are some things that we missed with that content piece, how can we now inject that into future iterations. So we think of this concept of the insights committee, where you're really fostering a continuous loop of reviewing content, optimizing it, and then creating new content ideas moving forward.
Yeah.
It relates to another concept that I thought I'd bounce off you as far as a content consumption story. And what I mean by this is that you can start to really understand trends in buying behavior. So, for example, we're seeing about 8 pieces of content consumed before a customer buys on average. And that's pretty interesting to us because say you've engaged with someone, you've had some good conversations. As you work across a buying committee, you see a spike in some of those content assets being consumed. And then say right before a contract signature, it really spikes quite often because, again, it's being shopped around multiple stakeholders in the business to get that final approval. So you can then start to tailor the way that you share with people based on that consumption story. What are your thoughts on how you can understand that from your side? And what are some of the ways that you really think that this could be delivered at scale?
Yeah, as a salesperson for I won't tell you how many years, but I wish I had some of this technology and that capability when I was starting out in my sales career. The capability to have insight into what your customers are engaging with the content that you've shared with them. Oftentimes it's sending an email and you have no idea if they even opened it. If they did open it, did they share it with their CFO? Did they share it with their CEO? And so to have that visibility to know what kind of level of engagement your prospect has with you, but also you can start to prioritize your time as a salesperson to know which customer or which prospects are the ones that you should reach out to and which ones haven't engaged with your content at all. So to be able to see that is extremely powerful in the sales process. And I think it's starting to become a little bit more widely known that that's a good thing for organizations to have. We think about it in kind of crawl, walk, run, and this is definitely a crawl part of this. This is super easy to do. But it's super high value to your sales team as well.
That's a great point. I think that the return on time really stands out to me. We're all really busy. Buyers, customers, and people serving them are busy. So how can we go from noise to focus? And then how can we really replicate that? And it relates to what's on the screen here as far as advocacy at scale, or the ability to educate the market at scale by uniform approaches from sales teams, and then continue to use what we've talked about, the data to help you basically take this to the next step. So as we move towards our question period for the back 5 minutes of the call, what are some of your biggest takeaways, Kyle, from this experience in the chat?
Yeah, the buying experience is fundamentally changed. We focus, like I said before, we focus a lot on buying experience here at Showpad. And that's one of the places where salespeople can really go from salesperson to sales professional by being really having excellence in helping the buyers achieve what they want to achieve, sitting on the same side of the table as them, understanding their pain points, understanding what's going to help them in their role and in their organization. We know that the customer is 60% of the way through the buying cycle or the sales cycle by the time they engage sales reps. So that buying experience and adding value in that moment, in that first interaction that you have with them and every subsequent conversation that you have with them is of the utmost importance and really helps you stand out as a sales professional.
Awesome. I completely agree with your thinking on it. What jumps out at me here is it's got to start with continuous learning. We have to take it on ourselves to prioritize learning consistently. We have to understand the market that we serve, those industry trends, the companies that we're serving, the type of personas that we have access to, etc. So continuous learning is really important. That stands out to me. and then also really ensuring that you're professionally persistent. We both had a few examples there on how you've got to hustle still, right? Even though you've got some more intelligence and you can be smarter in what you're doing, you've got to put forward the effort so that you can learn something, apply it, fail, but fail fast, and then get back up and be smarter in what you do. So those were some of my takeaways. All right, let's move into some Q&A, team. I can see already a few questions have come in. First one is, what kind of collateral have you find most useful in training sales professionals in situational selling or in a certain type of scenario, if you will? What are your thoughts on that, Kyle?
We already talked about it earlier. Engaging content. It actually, the format doesn't matter. It's as long as it's engaging, as long as it's something that a rep can use, as long as it's something that adds value. So whether it's internally facing content or externally facing content, it has to be engaging. So find the medium that makes the most sense and drive that, as opposed to trying to create a whole bunch of one-pagers because you don't think that salespeople have enough attention span to read past one page. So as long as it's engaging, people will be excited to use it.
Right. I think that makes a ton of sense. Quick thing just to let everyone know, there are a couple handouts. So if you click on the handout tab, I think that can help reinforce a lot of the chat. So feel free to tap into those free resources. And then as I move into the next question, as we get close to the wrap here, someone has asked, how can sales professionals determine buyer maturity based on content consumed? I think that relates to what you shared, but let me know if you have a couple other comments, and I wouldn't mind mentioning something as well.
You bet. Yeah, I think it goes directly to what I was saying earlier, which is if you know that a customer or prospect is engaging with the content that you've shared with them, you know that they are excited about your interactions and that there's some real value there. In addition, you can also see if to be able to see if they've shared it with others tells you how mature they are in their buying process. Nobody wants to be single-threaded in a sales cycle. Everybody wants to know that there are multiple stakeholders looking at their solution. And so to be able to have that insight, I think is very telling in their maturity and readiness to buy.
Yeah, I really like your point around being single-threaded versus engaging the whole committee and being smarter in understanding beyond title, who has influence? Who are those change agents, or as the challenger sale would say, those mobilizers? Who are the people that are really helping to cause change? Because regardless of the solution, even if you're doing something internally, you got to get people together in order to cause that change. So I think that's a really important point on how content can help you avoid being single-threaded. Last question. I think it's pretty interesting as well. What's a good balance between sharing content from your own organization versus more general industry content? What do you think about that?
Yeah, early on in the process, nobody wants to feel like they're being sold to. And especially if you work in an industry or sell a product that is not the norm and is not very well understood by everybody. I think being a thought leader and being able to share externally created pieces of content that go to support your message or what you're trying to get them to take a look at, I think is very powerful. Mm-hmm. When you get further along into the buying cycle, when you're closer to closing the deal, I think it's less relevant. I would like to see our reps using more internally created content that's specific to the exact conversation that they know that they need to have with the customer.
Right. So it kind of goes from more, it's kind of like awareness, consideration, decision in the sense that you may be leveraging more third-party content up front just to make sure everyone understands the state of the industry or some of the trends that you're helping to educate on. Then as you move more closely towards a decision, let's get laser focused on how we're going to solve XYZ problem, to foster growth or reduce costs, whatever the case may be. All right, team, we're almost at the end here. I thought one more question. I thought it was interesting because it relates to another trend we're seeing in the market as far as account-based everything or account-based marketing. What's your perspective on actually training people on this as sellers rather than only marketers? Essentially giving salespeople more marketing skills. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend that we see as well. So we were just talking about account-based marketing, account-based sales, account-based everything. And it it can be really transformational for a business to go through that exercise, to really focus on the kinds of customers that they really want to be spending their precious resources on, their ideal customer profile or ICP, to know what that is so that you can take your targeted shots to make sure that you're spending those precious resources on the right types of prospects. I think it's super important for the sales team to understand that that's happening, because sales perspective of marketing is that that's one-to-many communication. And so if you change to an account-based marketing strategy, you start to lessen the feeling of trying to boil the ocean and trying to prospect into every single account that's out there. And so the sales team has to know that that's going on in the organization, because they're going to start to see maybe less leads, but better leads, really, really targeted, high quality leads that the company really wants to make their customers.
Awesome. With that, I think we'll wrap it. We're just a few minutes over. Kyle, thanks so much for your participation and insight. Great chatting with you. We'll be sure to send out the recording of the webinar to everyone that was involved today. So don't hesitate to consume the handouts, check out the recording, and reach out if you have any questions. Have a fantastic day, Kyle, and everyone, thanks for joining. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Brian.